Something massive slammed into the driver's side door of Sarah Chen. The car spun like a top on black ice, even though it was late September and the road was bone dry. Sarah's scream caught in her throat as the vehicle careened toward the ditch, headlights strobing across towering pines. Metal shrieked. Glass exploded inward in a shower of diamonds. And then there was nothing but the hiss of the dying engine and Sarah's ragged breathing. This was supposed to be a normal night. She was thinking about her grocery list. Not about the full moon hanging like a bloated corpse above the trees. Not about the emergency alert that had buzzed across every phone in Hollow Creek 30 minutes earlier. Shelter in place. Lock all doors and windows. This is not a drill. No. Sarah was thinking about whether she had enough milk for tomorrow's breakfast, her fingers wrapped around the steering wheel of her Honda Civic as she turned onto Pine Ridge Road, still 5 miles from home. She tasted copper, blood from where she'd bitten her tongue. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone, which had launched itself somewhere into the darkness of the passenger side footwell. Through the fractured windshield, she could see the empty road stretching ahead, illuminated by one working headlight. Then she saw the reflection in her rearview mirror. 2 eyes. Burning yellow gold. Hovering at least 7 feet off the ground. Sarah's breath stopped completely. Every nerve in her body fired at once, flooding her system with adrenaline that made her vision sharp and terrible. The thing behind her car was breathing, she realized. She could see its breath fogging in the cool September air, could hear the wet sound of its inhalations. Her fingers finally closed around her phone. The screen was cracked but functional. No signal. Of course there was no signal. Pine Ridge Road was a dead zone even on good days. The breathing stopped. In the sudden silence, Sarah heard something worse, the creak of claws on metal. The thing was climbing onto her car. The roof buckled with a groan that sounded almost human, almost like agony. Sarah didn't remember the crash safety training from her office job, didn't think about proper procedure or insurance claims or anything that belonged to the daylight world. She simply moved. Her hand shot to the door handle and she threw herself out of the car, legs tangling with the deployed airbag before she tumbled onto the asphalt. The fall should have hurt more than it did. Later, she would find bruises the size of dinner plates mottling her hips and shoulders. But in that moment, she felt nothing except the imperative to run. She ran. Behind her, something that was not a wolf and not a man released a sound that started as a howl and ended as a scream. Sarah didn't look back. Her work flats slapped against the pavement, her breath came in hitching sobs, and the woods on either side of the road seemed to lean inward, reaching for her with branch fingers. A sign flashed past in her peripheral vision, Hollow Creek, 4 miles. For miles. She'd never run 4 miles in her life. In high school gym class, she'd walked most of the required mile, chatting with friends about weekend plans and cafeteria drama. But high school had been 15 years ago, and the thing behind her was not a disappointed gym teacher. It was gaining on her. She could hear it now, not just the breathing, but the rhythm of its movement. Not quite footsteps. Something between a lope and a gallop, something that spoke of power and grace and hunger that was older than human civilization. Sarah's lungs burned. A stitch opened in her side like a second mouth, screaming with every breath. Her vision began to tunnel, darkness creeping in from the edges. She was going to die on this road. She was going to die thinking about milk and eggs and whether she'd remembered to pay her car insurance. Then she saw the light. At first she thought it was a hallucination, a trick of her oxygen-starved brain. But no, there, maybe 100 yards ahead, a porch light blazed like a lighthouse beacon. A house. Set back from the road, half hidden by overgrown hedges, but definitely a house. Sarah found reserves she didn't know she possessed. Her legs pumped harder. The ache in her side became white noise. The sound of pursuit behind her grew louder, closer, close enough that she could smell it now. Wet fur and old meat and something else, something that reminded her of the metallic tang of her own fierce sweat. 50 yards. The thing behind her snarled, and Sarah felt the displacement of air as something massive swiped at her back. Claws whistled past, missing by inches. 20 yards. She could see the house clearly now. Colonial style, paint peeling, completely dark except for that single porch light. The driveway was gravel, and Sarah's feet found it with gratitude, the sound of her footfalls changing pitch. 10 yards. The front door was opening. Someone was there, backlit, holding something that looked like a baseball bat. Sarah launched herself up the porch steps, ankle rolling on the first one but momentum carrying her forward. Hands grabbed her human hands, warm and rough with calluses, and yanked her inside. The door slammed shut with a bang that sounded like a gunshot. For a moment, Sarah simply lay on the floor of someone's entryway, gasping like a landed fish, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. Above her, someone was engaging locks. Multiple locks. She counted the sounds: deadbolt, chain, something else that sounded heavier, more serious. Then the person who had pulled her inside spoke. "You're bleeding." Sarah looked down at herself. Her white blouse was torn and soaked with something dark. When had that happened? She touched her shoulder experimentally and her fingers came away red. "It got me," she whispered. The words felt strange in her mouth, too big, too terrible. When it hit the car. "It got me." The person crouched down, and Sarah finally looked at them properly. A woman, maybe late 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical braid. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and her eyes were the sharpest things Sarah had ever seen, like broken glass catching light. "Let me see," the woman said. Sarah tried to pull away, but the woman's hands were already peeling back the torn fabric of her blouse. The wounds weren't deep, 4 parallel scratches across her shoulder blade, already clotting. They burned like someone had drawn lines of fire across her skin. The woman's expression did something complicated. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and Sarah saw something that might have been pity flicker across her face before it hardened into something else entirely. "What's your name?" the woman asked. "Sarah." "Sarah Chin." "What?" A impact against the front door cut her off. The whole house shook. The woman stood in one fluid motion, snatching up the baseball bat Sarah had noticed earlier. Except now that Sarah looked at it properly, she could see it wasn't a baseball bat at all. It was something older, darker. A club of some kind, with symbols carved into the wood. "My name is Margaret Thorne," the woman said without looking away from the door. "And you've just walked into the worst night of your life, Sarah Chen. That thing that scratched you? That was a werewolf. A real, honest-to-God werewolf. And now you've got about 28 days before the next full moon." Another impact. The door held, but Sarah could hear wood splintering. "What happens in 28 days?" Sarah asked, though some animal part of her brain already knew the answer. Margaret finally looked at her, and Sarah saw an entire lifetime of terrible knowledge in those sharp eyes. "In 28 days, you become what's trying to break down my door. Unless we can stop it. Unless we can break the curse. Unless we can do something that hasn't been done in Hollow Creek for 140 years. The door exploded inward. The creature that burst through Margaret Thorne's doorway barely fit through the frame. Sarah's mind tried to categorize it, to make it make sense. Her brain offered options: bear, oversized dog, man in a costume. But her eyes, her ancient prey-animal eyes, knew exactly what it was. This was the thing that had stalked humans since we first learned to walk upright. This was the nightmare that taught us to fear the dark. It stood hunched in the entryway, knuckles on the ground like a gorilla, but its proportions were all wrong. Too tall. Arms too long. The head was a wolf's head, but scaled up to something monstrous, jaws that could close around a human torso. In the light of Margaret's hallway, Sarah could see its fur was matted with burrs and what might have been old blood. Its eyes found her. Yellow gold. Intelligent. Hungry. Margaret moved. The club in her hands came around in a wide arc, and Sarah heard something, a word, maybe, or a sound older than words, hiss between Margaret's clenched teeth. The club connected with the creature's shoulder with a crack like a gunshot. The werewolf howled and stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. "The basement," Margaret said without taking her eyes off the creature. "Go. Now." Sarah's body moved before her mind caught up, legs carrying her deeper into the house. She caught glimpses as she ran, living room frozen in time, furniture from the 70s, pictures on the walls of people in old-fashioned clothes. A hallway. a door that hung open on darkness. She plunged down basement stairs without benefit of light, hands on the walls to keep from falling. Behind and above her, she heard sounds of combat. Growls. The crack of wood. Margaret's voice raised in what might have been a shout or a chant. Then nothing. Sarah stood in the darkness of Margaret's basement, lungs heaving, and waited to die. But death didn't come. Instead, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Human footsteps. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "It's gone," Margaret said. She looked worse for wear. A cut above her left eye was leaking blood, and she favored her right leg, but she was alive. "It'll be back, but it's gone for now." Sarah found she was shaking. Full body tremors that started in her core and radiated outward until her teeth chattered. Margaret saw and moved to her, wrapping a blanket that smelled of mothballs around her shoulders. "Shock," Margaret said. "Normal response to impossible situations. Breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth." "That's it." "That was real," Sarah heard herself say. "That was really real." Yes, werewolves are real. In Hollow Creek they are. Have been for a long time. The flashlight beam revealed that Margaret's basement was less a basement and more a bunker. The walls were lined with shelves containing jars of herbs, bottles of liquids in colors Sarah had no names for, and books, hundreds of books, their spines cracked and worn. In one corner stood what looked like a weapons rack holding various clubs, knives, and things Sarah couldn't identify. Margaret guided her to a cot in the corner and made her sit. Then she disappeared for a moment, returning with a first aid kit and a bottle of something amber. "Whiskey," Margaret said, unscrewing the cap. "Medical purposes." Sarah took the bottle and drank. The liquid burned all the way down, but it did seem to steady something inside her. While she drank, Margaret cleaned and bandaged the scratches on her shoulder with practiced efficiency. "How deep did it get you?" Margaret asked. "Not very. I think it just caught me when it hit the car." "Good. Shallow is better. Gives us more time." "Time for what?" Margaret finished tying off the bandage and sat back on her heels. In the flashlight's glow, her face looked ancient, carved from stone. "Time to break the curse before it takes root in you. You were scratched on the night of a full moon by a werewolf. That means the infection is in your blood now. By the next full moon, 28 days from now, it'll have spread through your entire system. And then you'll change. Into that thing. Into a thing like that, yes. You'll lose yourself. Lose your humanity. Become a killer. And Hollow Creek already has too many of those." Sarah took another drink. Her hands had stopped shaking, but now a different kind of tremor had started, the kind that came from understanding that your entire conception of reality had been wrong. "How many?" she asked. "How many werewolves?" Margaret stood, moving to one of the shelves. She pulled down a leather-bound journal, opened it to a page marked with a fraying ribbon. "According to my records, there are currently 7 active werewolves in Hollow Creek. The one that attacked you was Marcus Webb. Used to run the hardware store on Main Street. Used to. He's been a werewolf for 3 years now. Doesn't have much humanity left. Mostly hunts in the woods, takes deer and livestock. But during the full moon, the hunger gets worse. They all come into town, looking for easier prey." Sarah thought about the emergency alert, the one she'd ignored because she was thinking about groceries. "The whole town knows?" "The whole town knows. We've developed a system. First day of every full moon, everyone locks themselves inside. Triple bolt their doors. Draw the sigils on their windows. We've learned to coexist with them after a fashion. Most months, we only lose 1 or 2 people. Usually transients passing through. People who don't know the rules. 1 or 2 people." Sarah heard her voice go flat. "Every month. I know how it sounds. But you have to understand, Hollow Creek has been this way for a very long time. Since 1885, to be precise. That's when the curse first came to this town. And every attempt to break it, to leave, to call for outside help, they've all failed." "What do you mean they failed?" Margaret's face did something complicated. "The curse is tied to the land. Anyone who becomes a werewolf in Hollow Creek can't leave. There's a boundary, about 10 miles out in every direction. werewolves who try to cross it. She made a gesture like an explosion. And anyone who tries to bring help from outside finds that as soon as they cross the boundary, they forget why they came. Forget Hollow Creek exists entirely. We're trapped here. All of us. The afflicted and the survivors alike. Sarah stood abruptly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. No, I'm not staying here. I'm not becoming one of those things. I'm leaving. Right now. She made it 3 steps toward the stairs before Margaret's hand closed around her wrist. You can leave, Margaret said quietly. The boundary doesn't affect the newly infected. Not yet. Not until after your first transformation. You could walk out of Hollow Creek right now and never come back. Sarah stopped. Then why? Because the infection goes with you. In 28 days, wherever you are, you'll transform. Maybe you'll be in your apartment in the city. Maybe you'll be visiting family. Maybe you'll be in a crowded restaurant. And when you change, you'll kill. You'll kill everyone around you, and you won't remember a second of it when you wake up naked and covered in blood the next morning. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She sank back onto the cot. Or, Margaret continued, you can stay. Stay and let me help you. There's a ritual, an old one. It's never worked, not completely, but I've been studying it for years. Refining it. I think I finally understand what went wrong all those other times. I think I can break your curse before it sets. But you have to trust me. And you have to stay in Hollow Creek. Sarah looked up at this woman she'd met less than an hour ago, this woman who was offering her an impossible choice, become a monster alone, or stay and fight for a humanity she might not be able to keep. Why? Sarah asked. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Margaret's expression softened for the first time since she'd pulled Sarah into her house. Because 20 years ago, I was exactly where you are. I was scratched. I was infected. And someone helped me. They performed the ritual, and it worked. Not perfectly, I still have the sensitivity to silver, still have dreams during the full moon, but I kept my humanity. I didn't transform. And I swore that if I ever had the chance, I'd pass that gift along. She held out her hand. So what's it going to be, Sarah-chan? Run and hope you don't hurt anyone when you change? Or stay and fight? Sarah looked at the hand extended toward her. She thought about her apartment in the city, her job at the insurance company, her mother who called every Sunday, her kid sister who was getting married next spring. She thought about all the ordinary things she'd worried about just this morning, deadlines and bills, and whether she needed new tires. All of it felt like it belonged to someone else now. Someone who had died when that thing hit her car. Sarah reached out and took Margaret's hand. Teach me, she said. Teach me how to fight. Margaret's grip was strong, warm, alive. Good, she said. Then we start tonight. We have 28 days to do what's never been done before. 28 days to break a curse that's older than anyone in Hollow Creek. No pressure. Despite everything, the terror, the impossibility, the wounds on her shoulder that burned with unnatural heat, Sarah found herself almost smiling. No pressure at all. Sarah learned more about Hollow Creek in the first 3 days of her 28-day countdown than most residents learned in a lifetime. She learned that the town had been founded in 1847 by a group of families fleeing religious persecution back east. They'd chosen this particular valley in the Oregon wilderness because it was isolated, defensible, far from the judgment of others. She learned that for 38 years, Hollow Creek had been a normal town. Hardworking, God-fearing, boring in the way that small towns are boring. Then came Jackson Frost. Margaret told her the story on the second night, as they sat in the basement sorting through jars of herbs. Sarah's job was to identify and label them according to an ancient book whose pages crumbled at the edges. Margaret's job was to prepare them, grinding some to powder, mixing others with liquids whose origin Sarah tried not to think about too hard. Jackson Frost came to Hollow Creek in the spring of 1885, Margaret said. He was a trapper, or that's what he claimed to be. Handsome devil by all accounts. Charming. The kind of man who could talk his way into anyone's good graces. He rented a room above the saloon and spent his days in the woods, his nights drinking and playing cards. Let me guess, Sarah said, carefully measuring out what the book called wolfsbane, handle with gloves. He was a werewolf. Worse. He was a werewolf who knew he was a werewolf, who had some measure of control over the curse. And he was angry at the world for what had been done to him. So he decided to spread his curse as far and wide as he could. Margaret paused in her grinding, staring at nothing. He started with the children. Easier to control, he thought. Easier to manipulate. He'd take them into the woods, show them secret places, let the wolf come close enough to scratch but not kill. By the time their parents realized something was wrong, half the children in Hollow Creek were infected. Sarah felt her stomach turn. That's monstrous. Yes. And it got worse. The first full moon after he started his campaign, 7 children transformed. They killed 12 people before the adults managed to lock them in the church. And even then, the transformations kept happening. More children. Then adults who'd been scratched trying to save the children. Within 6 months, a quarter of Hollow Creek's population were werewolves. What happened to Jackson Frost? The remaining townspeople hunted him down. They were terrified, desperate. They caught him in human form and they made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. They burned what was left and buried the ashes at a crossroads outside of town. Thought that would end the curse. But it didn't. No, because by then, the curse had put down roots. It had fed on enough blood, claimed enough souls. It didn't need Jackson Frost anymore. It became part of Hollow Creek itself. Part of the land, the air, the water. And anyone who was bitten or scratched by a werewolf, anyone who made physical contact with one during a full moon, carried the infection forward. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Finally, she asked, "How did you survive? The person who saved you, how did they break the curse?" Margaret's hands stilled in their work. Her name was Elena Vasquez. She was the town librarian, and she'd spent 40 years researching the curse, looking for a way to break it. When I was scratched, I was just passing through town, didn't know about the full moon protocols. Elena found me. She took me in, just like I took you in. And she performed a ritual that had been passed down through fragments of old texts, journals from the first generation of survivors. It partially worked. I didn't transform, but the curse left its mark. I'm still connected to it somehow. Still feel the pull of the full moon. And Elena? She died 5 years ago. Natural causes, peacefully in her sleep. But before she went, she made me promise to continue her work. To keep searching for a way to fully break the curse. And to save anyone I could, the way she saved me. Sarah looked down at the wolfsbane in her hands, at the gloves protecting her skin from its poison. So we're going to try the same ritual on me? A refined version of it. Elena's notes were incomplete. She was working from fragments, piecing together a ritual that had been lost to time. But I've spent 5 years filling in the gaps. I think I understand now what the ritual actually does. It doesn't break the curse, Sarah. It redirects it. Channels it into something else. Something that doesn't require transformation, doesn't require blood. Into what? Margaret smiled, and it was the first time Sarah had seen her look genuinely hopeful. That's what we're going to find out together. The days blurred into a rhythm. Mornings, Sarah helped Margaret gather ingredients from the woods surrounding her property, always careful, always armed with the silver-edged knife Margaret had given her. The forest felt different now, watching her with eyes she couldn't see but could feel. Every shadow might hide teeth. Every rustle might be the prelude to attack. Afternoons were for study. Sarah pored over Elena's journals, learning the history of every werewolf in Hollow Creek. Learning their human names, their stories, when and how they'd been infected. Some entries made her heart ache. Timothy Morrison, age 9, infected June 1962. Disappeared into the woods after his 3rd transformation. Parents held a funeral with an empty casket. Sometimes his howls can be heard on quiet nights, and I wonder if some part of him remembers what he was. Others filled her with a cold dread. Catherine Lowe, infected 2003, maintains partial human consciousness during transformations. She is perhaps the most dangerous of them all, intelligent enough to hunt strategically, human enough to know exactly where her former neighbors hide. Evenings were for the ritual preparations. Margaret taught her the words, not quite Latin, not quite anything Sarah recognized. Older than Latin, Margaret said. older than most human languages. Words that tasted like metal and earth on Sarah's tongue. You have to mean them, Margaret insisted. The ritual doesn't work if you're just reciting. You have to feel the weight of each word, understand what you're asking for. You're negotiating with the curse itself, Sarah. Asking it to release its hold on you. And curses don't let go easily. On the 7th night, Sarah woke from a dream of running on 4 legs through moonlit woods, the taste of fresh blood in her mouth. She lay in the guest room Margaret had given her, staring at the ceiling, touching the bandage on her shoulder. The wounds had healed with unnatural speed, leaving 4 pale scars that looked like they'd been there for years instead of days. She could feel something changing inside her. A restlessness that made her skin itch, made her want to break things, to run until her lungs burst. The curse taking root, Margaret had explained. The infection spreading through her system like vines through soil. On the 10th night, she met Marcus Webb for the first time. Margaret had sent her to town to pick up supplies, salt, candles, specific herbs that only grew in Mrs. Chen's garden on Maple Street. No relation, Sarah had said when she saw the name, and Margaret had almost smiled. The town in daylight was surreal. Normal. People went about their business, shopping, chatting on street corners, walking dogs. No one would guess that every month, some of these people transformed into monsters. Sarah was walking back to Margaret's truck, arms full of paper bags, when she saw him. He stood outside what used to be Webb's hardware, according to the faded sign. The windows were boarded up, the door chained shut. He was tall, rangy, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a face that might have been handsome before it had been carved into something harder. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and he was staring at the hardware store like he was trying to remember something important. She found herself walking toward him. He turned as she approached, and she saw his eyes widen. "Hi," he called out in greeting to her. "Hi," Sarah replied, watching as he assessed her and sniffed in as if taking her scent in. His eyes widened and he moved closer to her, sniffing in more. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, "And who are you?" Marcus Webb. That name. That was the name Margaret called the wolf who had bitten her. This was Marcus Webb. She should have run. Should have dropped the groceries and sprinted back to Margaret's truck. Instead, she found herself walking toward him. He turned as she approached, and she saw his eyes widen. The same yellow gold eyes from that night on Pine Ridge Road, but muted now, almost human. "You," he said. His voice was rough and used. "You're the one from the road." "Sarah Chin," she said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "And you're the werewolf. You shouldn't be here." He looked around nervously, like he expected someone to appear. "You should have left town. You should have run as far and fast as you could. Margaret Thorne is helping me. We're going to break the curse." Something flashed across his face, hope, maybe, or hunger, or something in between. Margaret Thorne is a dreamer. There is no breaking this curse. Only surviving it. Or not. She broke it for herself. She got lucky. And she only partially broke it. I can smell it on her, even now. The wolf is still there, just buried deep. One day it'll wake up, and then she'll be like the rest of us. Trapped in her own body, watching herself kill. Sarah set down her groceries. "Is that what it's like for you? Are you still in there when you change?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Up close, she could see the toll the curse had taken. He was too thin, his skin stretched tight over his bones. His hands shook slightly, constantly. And his eyes, even in human form, there was something wild in them, something that flinched away from direct eye contact. "The first few transformations, yes," he said finally. "I was there, screaming inside my own head while my body hunted and killed. I remember every person I've..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "But it gets easier. After a while, the human part goes quiet, goes to sleep, and the wolf takes over completely. It's almost a mercy." "How long have you been infected?" 3 years. "I have maybe another year before I'm gone completely. Before Marcus Webb stops existing and there's just the wolf. Then let me help you." The words came out before Sarah could think about them. "Whatever Margaret is doing for me, maybe it could work for you too. Maybe we could save you. And then others." Marcus laughed, and it was the saddest sound Sarah had ever heard. You don't save werewolves, Sarah Chen. You survive them, or you become them, or you put them down. Those are the only options in Hollow Creek. I don't believe that. Then you're still new to this. He picked up her groceries, handed them to her gently. His fingers brushed hers, and Sarah felt a shock of recognition, not romantic, but something deeper. A connection forged by shared curse, shared doom. Go back to Margaret. Do her ritual. Save yourself if you can. But don't waste your time trying to save me. I'm already gone. He walked away before Sarah could respond, disappearing around a corner. She stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, arms full of supplies for a ritual she half believed in, watching the space where he'd been. I will save you, she said to the empty air. I will save both of us. Margaret was not pleased when Sarah told her about the encounter. Marcus Webb is dangerous, she said, slamming jars onto the basement shelves with more force than necessary. He's been a werewolf for 3 years. The human is almost gone. You can't trust anything he says or does. He seemed lucid. Aware. He knew who he was, knew who I was. During the day, yes. Most of them maintain some humanity during daylight hours, at least for the first few years. But the closer we get to the full moon, the more the wolf comes to the surface. And during the transformation, Margaret stopped, closed her eyes. During the transformation, there is no Marcus Webb. There's only hunger and rage and the desire to hunt. You have to remember that, Sarah. Whatever you think you saw in him today, it's not the whole truth. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about him. About the pain in his eyes when he talked about losing himself. About the way his hands shook, like he was constantly fighting for control. On the 14th night, exactly 2 weeks until her first transformation, she snuck out of Margaret's house. She knew it was stupid, knew it was dangerous. But she had to see him again, had to understand what she was facing, what she was becoming. And some part of her, some part that was perhaps already more wolf than woman, needed to know if there was anything left of the human he'd been. She found him in the woods north of town, in a clearing lit by starlight. He was sitting on a fallen log, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. When he heard her approach, he didn't look up. I told you not to waste your time on me, he said. I'm stubborn that way. Stupid, more like. Sarah sat down on the other end of the log, keeping a safe distance. Tell me about before. Before you were infected. What was your life like? Why? Because I need to know that there's still a person in there. That the curse doesn't erase who you were. Marcus was quiet for so long Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I ran the hardware store. Took over from my father when he died. It was a good life. Simple. I knew everyone in town, knew their kids' names, what projects they were working on. Mrs. Chin would come in every spring to buy seeds for her garden, and we'd talk about what grew well in Hollow Creek soil. Mr. Morrison would spend hours debating the merits of different power drills. It was normal. Safe. What happened? Carelessness. Arrogance. I thought I knew the woods around here, thought I could take a shortcut home one night after closing up late. It was the night of the full moon, but I'd lived in Hollow Creek my whole life. I thought I was smart enough, fast enough. I thought it wouldn't happen to me. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were luminous in the starlight. 3 years later, and I haven't opened that store once. Haven't seen my friends, my neighbors. I live in the woods like an animal, and once a month I become one. That's what the curse does, Sarah. It doesn't just change your body. It changes your entire existence. Margaret says the ritual can redirect the curse. Channel it into something that doesn't require transformation. And what if she's wrong? What if you perform the ritual and it fails, and you transform anyway, and you hurt someone because you stayed in Hollow Creek instead of running? His voice rose. What if you kill someone, Sarah, because you believed in a dream instead of accepting reality? What if the dream is possible? What if we could break this curse, not just for me but for everyone? Wouldn't that be worth the risk? Marcus stood abruptly. You've been infected for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and you think you understand this curse? You think you can fix something that's been destroying this town for 140 years? You're not a hero, Sarah. You're a victim. And the sooner you accept that, the better. He started to walk away, but Sarah called after him. I'm going to break this curse, Marcus. And when I do, I'm coming back for you. Whether you want me to or not. He stopped, shoulders rigid. Don't make promises you can't keep. It's not a promise. It's a fact. He disappeared into the trees without another word. But Sarah sat in that clearing until dawn, watching the stars will overhead, feeling the curse move through her blood like a second heartbeat, and planning. The next 7 days passed in a blur of preparation. Margaret taught Sarah the full ritual, the words, the movements, the precise timing required. They practiced in the basement every night, Sarah reciting the ancient phrases until her throat was raw, until the words felt like part of her own heartbeat. The ritual has 3 parts, Margaret explained. The acknowledgement, where you recognize the curse for what it is. The negotiation, where you offer something in exchange for your humanity. And the binding, where you lock the curse into a new form. Most people who've tried this ritual failed at the second step. They didn't understand what the curse wanted. What does it want? Blood. Always blood. But Elena discovered something crucial. The curse doesn't care whose blood it is. It doesn't need human blood specifically. It just needs the act of taking life, the rush of the hunt, the taste of fear. What we're going to try to do is redirect that need. Give the curse something else to feed on. Like what? Margaret pulled out a small vial filled with dark red liquid. Animal blood. Deer, specifically. During the ritual, at the moment of negotiation, you'll drink this. You'll offer the curse a new compact, blood and death, yes, but not human blood. Not human death. You'll promise to hunt, to feed the curse's hunger, but on your terms. As a human who hunts animals, not a wolf that hunts humans. Sarah looked at the vial with a mixture of hope and revulsion. That's it? We offer it deer blood instead of human blood and it just agrees. It's more complicated than that. The negotiation is a battle of wills. The curse will push back hard. It'll show you things, offer you things, try to convince you that human blood is the only blood worth having. You'll have to be strong. Stronger than you've ever been. And even if you succeed, it's not a complete victory. The curse will still be there, lurking in your blood. You'll still have urges, instincts. But you won't transform. You won't lose yourself. Unless it doesn't work. Unless it doesn't work, Margaret agreed grimly. In which case, on the night of the full moon, you'll transform, and I'll have to put you down before you hurt anyone. Those are the stakes, Sarah. Are you ready to accept them? Sarah thought about Marcus in the woods, about the pain in his eyes. About all the people in Hollow Creek who lived in fear once a month, who had lost friends and family to the curse. About the children in Elena's journals, infected by Jackson Frost's cruelty. I'm ready, she said. But she wasn't planning to just save herself. Over the next few days, while Margaret refined the ritual preparations, Sarah went into town. She visited the library and pored over Elena Vasquez's public records, every scrap of research the old librarian had compiled about the curse. She talked to the survivors, the people who'd lived with werewolves in their midst for decades. She learned everything she could about how the curse worked, how it spread, what fed it. And slowly, gradually, an idea formed. On the 20th night, 3 days before the full moon, Sarah found Marcus again. This time she brought Margaret's journal, the one where she'd been taking notes. I think I figured something out, she said without preamble. Marcus was in his usual clearing. He looked worse than before, thinner, more feral. The wolf was rising in him as the full moon approached. But his eyes were still his own, still human. Sarah, you need to leave. It's not safe for you to be near me this close to the full moon. Just listen. Please. She opened the journal, showed him her notes. The curse feeds on violence, on death. But what if we could satisfy that hunger without actually hurting anyone? Margaret's ritual redirects the curse by offering animal blood instead of human blood. But I think we can take it further. I think we can modify the ritual to not just prevent transformation, but to change what transformation means. Marcus looked at her notes, incomprehension on his face. I don't understand. What if you could transform but stay yourself? What if the wolf form wasn't controlled by bloodlust, but by your human consciousness? You'd still be Marcus Webb, just in a different shape. No uncontrollable hunger. No mindless violence. Just another form of being. That's impossible. The curse doesn't work that way. How do you know? Has anyone ever tried? Elena was focused on preventing transformation entirely. But what if that's the wrong approach? What if the transformation itself isn't the problem, it's the loss of humanity that comes with it? Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, that same sad sound from before. You really are stubborn. I prefer determined. Even if what you're suggesting were possible, and I don't believe it is, you can't test it on me. I'm too far gone. 3 years infected, Sarah. The ritual might work on you because the curse is still fresh. But for me, I'd need something more powerful. Something that could dig into my blood and bones and burn out 3 years of infection. It would probably kill me. Not if we adjust the dosage. Not if we combine multiple approaches. Margaret's ritual plus Elena's original research plus. Sarah hesitated, then pulled out a folded piece of paper. Plus this. It was a page photocopied from a book in the library, so old the text was barely legible. Instructions for something called the Right of Reclamation, dated 1847. The original founders of Hollow Creek, trying to protect themselves from supernatural threats. Where did you find this? Hidden in a book of town records. I don't think Elena ever saw it. It was misfiled under agricultural reports. But I think this is it, Marcus. I think this is the original protection ritual that the founders used before Jackson Frost came. Before the curse took root. It's designed to fortify the human soul against supernatural corruption. Marcus looked at the page, then at Sarah, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than despair in his eyes. You really think this could work? I think we have to try. Because if it does work, if we can break your curse, or at least give you control over it, then we can do it for the others too. All 7 werewolves. We could save everyone. Margaret would never agree to this. She'd say it's too dangerous, too experimental. Sarah closed the journal. Then we don't tell Margaret. Not until we're sure it works. You're asking me to trust you with my life. With my humanity, if I have any left. Yes. Why? Why do you care so much about saving me? You don't know me. Before that night on the road, you'd never even heard of Hollow Creek. Sarah opened her mouth to give a logical answer, because it was the right thing to do, because every life mattered, because she couldn't just save herself and leave others to suffer. But what came out was simpler, truer. Because when I look at you, I see what I'm going to become. And I need to believe that there's hope. Not just for me, but for anyone touched by this curse. I need to believe that we're more than what the curse wants us to be. Marcus was quiet. Then, okay, I'll let you try. But we do it tonight, before I lose myself completely to the full moon. And if it doesn't work, if I start to lose control, you have to promise me you'll run. Promise me you won't try to save me at the cost of your own life. I promise, Sarah lied. They went to work. Margaret's house was dark when Sarah returned, which meant the older woman was asleep upstairs. Perfect. Sarah gathered the supplies she needed: candles, salt, the vial of deer blood, and several ingredients she'd secretly prepared over the past few days. She also took the silver-edged knife Margaret had given her, just in case. She met Marcus at the crossroads north of town, the same place where the townspeople had buried Jackson Frost's ashes. The symbolism felt right, confronting the origin of the curse at the site of its source. You know this is crazy, right? Marcus said as Sarah began drawing a circle in salt around them. Completely insane, Sarah agreed. But I've been infected with a werewolf curse, and I'm about to perform an experimental ritual cobbled together from 3 different sources. I think crazy is relative at this point. Despite himself, Marcus smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, more like the hardware store owner he used to be. Sarah finished the salt circle and began lighting candles at the cardinal points. North, south, east, west. The night was clear, the moon 3 days from full but bright enough to cast shadows. She could feel its pull, could feel the curse in her blood responding to that lunar gravity. How much worse must it be for Marcus, who'd lived with this for 3 years? Tell me what to do, Marcus said. Sit in the center of the circle. Don't break the salt line no matter what happens. The ritual has 3 parts, just like Margaret's, but I've modified them. The first part, the acknowledgement, you do. You have to speak the words, claim the curse as your own. Can you do that? Marcus nodded. His hands were shaking badly now, and Sarah could see his pupils beginning to dilate. The wolf was rising. She handed him a piece of paper with the words written in her careful handwriting. Read these. Mean them. Make the curse hear you. Marcus took the paper. His voice, when he began to speak, was rough but steady. I am Marcus Webb. I am man and wolf, human and beast. The curse lives in my blood, in my bones, in the space between my heartbeats. I acknowledge what I am. I claim this darkness as mine. The air in the circle changed, grew heavier. The candles flickered despite the still night, and Sarah felt something watching them. Not hostile, not exactly. More like curious. Good, Sarah said. Now part 2. The negotiation. This is where it gets hard. She pulled out the vial of deer blood, but also something else, a second vial, this one filled with her own blood. She'd drawn it earlier, using a syringe from Margaret's medical supplies. You're going to drink both, she said. The deer blood satisfies the curse's need for death. But your blood, infected blood, mixed with mine, that creates a connection. My curse to yours. We're going to link them, Marcus. Whatever happens to me during my ritual in 3 days will affect you too. If I succeed in maintaining my humanity, in channeling the curse into something controllable, you'll feel it too. That's not how magic works. Are you an expert on how magic works? Fair point. She handed him the vials. Drink. And while you drink, I'm going to read the Rite of Reclamation. It's a protection spell meant to fortify your human soul against the wolf. Between the blood connection and the protection ritual, we're betting that we can give you enough strength to hold on to yourself when you transform. And if we're wrong, then I run, just like I promised. Another lie. But Marcus didn't need to know that. He drank the first vial, the deer blood, and grimaced. Then the second, and Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition. Connection. The curse in his blood calling to the curse in hers. Sarah began to read. The words of the Rite of Reclamation were in English, but they felt older than English, like they'd been translated from something primal. She read about the strength of the human spirit, about the soul's fortress against darkness, about the choice to remain oneself in the face of corruption. As she read, she could feel power gathering in the circle, feel something shifting in the air between them. Marcus began to change. It started with his eyes, the yellow gold flooding in, overwhelming the human brown. Then his teeth, elongating into fangs. His hands cramped into claws. Sarah, his voice was barely human. You need to go. Need to run. Can't hold it. Yes, you can. Sarah kept reading, her voice growing stronger. You're Marcus Webb. You're not the wolf. You're the man who ran a hardware store. Who knew everyone's names. Who loved this town. Hold on to that. Hold on to yourself. The transformation continued. Fur rippled across his skin. His bones shifted, reformed. But something was different from the transformation Sarah had witnessed on Pine Ridge Road. Marcus was changing slower. Fighting it. She could see the strain on his face, both faces, human and wolf, superimposed over each other in a way that should have been impossible. You are not the curse, Sarah said, reading the last lines of the rite. The curse is you. You contain it. You command it. You are. Marcus threw back his head and howled. It was a sound of agony and triumph mixed together, a sound that echoed off the trees and sent night birds fleeing from their roosts. His transformation completed in a rushful wolf form, massive and terrible in the candlelight. Sarah stood her ground, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. The wolf, Marcus, turned to face her. Yellow eyes met hers across the salt circle. Marcus? Sarah whispered. Are you there? The wolf sat. Then, slowly, deliberately, it nodded. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. It worked. Oh my God, it actually worked. The wolf, Marcus, made a sound halfway between a whine and a laugh. He looked down at his transformed body, at the massive paws and dark fur, and Sarah could see the wonder in his expression. He was there. He was still himself, even in this form. Can you change back? Sarah asked. Marcus closed his eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the transformation reversed, faster this time, smoother. Fur receded. Bones shifted. In less than a minute, he was human again, naked and shaking, but unmistakably himself. "I was there," he said, his voice full of awe. "I was the wolf, but I was also me. I could think. I could choose. I wasn't controlled by the hunger. I was just different." Sarah wanted to laugh, to cry, to shout her triumph to the stars. Instead, she stepped into the circle and hugged him, not caring about the nakedness or the impropriety. He was alive. He was himself. They'd done it. "We need to tell Margaret," she said when she finally stepped back. "We need to refine this, make it reproducible. If it works for you, it can work for the others." "Wait." Marcus caught her arm. "You connected our curses. Your blood to mine. What does that mean for you?" Sarah paused. She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered the implications. "I guess we'll find out in 3 days when I do my ritual." "Sarah, it'll be fine. Better than fine. We just proved that the curse can be controlled. That werewolves don't have to be mindless killers. That's everything." But as they gathered the ritual supplies and prepared to head back to town, Sarah felt something new in her blood. Not just her curse anymore. Her curse and Marcus's, intertwined like vines. Connected. When she looked at him, she could feel what he felt, the lingering echo of the transformation, the wolf nature that sat just beneath his skin now, calm instead of raging. And when he looked at her, she knew he felt the same thing. The infection spreading through her system, the countdown to her own transformation. But also her determination, her hope, her absolute certainty that they could fix this. 3 days, Marcus said quietly. 3 days, Sarah agreed. They didn't know it yet, but the connection they'd forged that night, part curse, part ritual, part something that neither of them had words for, would change everything. Not just for them, but for all of Hollow Creek. The hunt was almost over. But a new story was about to begin. Margaret Thorne knew something had changed the moment Sarah walked back into her house at dawn. "What did you do?" Margaret asked, blocking the doorway to the basement. Sarah, exhausted from a night of ritual work and very little sleep, tried to play innocent. "What do you mean?" "You reek of magic. Old magic. And..." Margaret leaned closer, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Blood magic. You connected yourself to something. Or someone." Her gaze hardened. "You want to see Marcus Webb, didn't you?" There was no point in lying. Margaret would figure it out eventually. Sarah pulled out her journal and explained everything, the modified ritual, the blood connection, Marcus's successful transformation while maintaining his human consciousness. Margaret's reaction was not what she expected. The older woman didn't yell or rage. She simply sat down at her kitchen table, looking suddenly old and tired. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Margaret asked quietly. "I saved him. I gave him back his humanity. You've created a link between 2 curse bearers. Sarah, that's never been tried before. Not in all of Elena's research, not in any of the historical records. We have no idea what the consequences might be. The consequence is that Marcus can control his transformation. Isn't that what we wanted? What we wanted was to break the curse. Not to make it more complex, more entangled. You've bound yourself to a werewolf 3 days before your own first transformation. What if his curse makes yours stronger? What if the connection means you'll transform regardless of the ritual?" Sarah hadn't thought of that. The possibility sent a spike of fear through her chest. But then she felt it, that new connection in her blood, reaching out to Marcus wherever he was in town. She could sense him, sense the calm control he had over his wolf nature now. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like solidarity. Like having an anchor in a storm. "It won't make it worse," Sarah said with a certainty she couldn't explain. "If anything, it'll make me stronger. I can feel him, Margaret. I can feel how he mastered the curse. That knowledge is in my blood now. It'll help me do the same." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Then she sighed. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Possibly both." She stood, moving to her carefully organized shelves of ritual supplies. "Well, if you're going to do something unprecedented, we might as well prepare for every possibility. We have 3 days to modify the ritual to account for this blood connection. 3 days to make sure that when you transform, if you transform, you have every possible advantage." Relief flooded through Sarah. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I'm furious. but I'm also practical and grudgingly impressed. What you did last night, creating a functional ritual from 3 different sources, that takes skill and intuition. Elena would have been proud. Margaret pulled down several jars, examining their contents. Now, tell me exactly what words you used, what ingredients, what configuration of the circle. We need to understand every element so we can reproduce it safely. They worked through the day, Margaret making notes and asking sharp questions. By afternoon, she'd mapped out a refined version of the ritual that incorporated elements from both Sarah's experiment and her own planned ceremony. If this works, Margaret said, spreading her notes across the table, we won't just save you. We'll have a proven methodology for treating werewolf infection. We could offer it to the others. Catherine Lowe, Timothy Morrison if we can find him, all 7 of Hollow Creek's werewolves. We could end the monthly hunts. That's the idea. It's ambitious. It's dangerous. And it relies on something working that has never worked before. Margaret looked at Sarah over her reading glasses. But I suppose that's never stopped Elena, and it's clearly not stopping you. So, let's do this properly. That evening, Margaret called a meeting. Not just Sarah, but also key members of the community, people who'd lived with the curse for decades, who'd lost loved ones to it. They gathered in Margaret's living room, Mrs. Chen from the garden shop, Thomas Morrison, father of the lost Timothy, Sheriff Helena Rodriguez, and several others. And Marcus. Sarah had insisted he be there, despite Margaret's reservations. He sat in a corner, trying to make himself small, clearly uncomfortable around people who'd known him before the infection. Margaret explained the situation, Sarah's impending transformation, the modified ritual, the results they'd achieved with Marcus. She expected resistance, skepticism. Instead, she got hope. You're saying Marcus can control his wolf form? Sheriff Rodriguez asked, looking at him with something like wonder. That he doesn't black out, doesn't lose himself to the hunger? Marcus nodded slowly. The hunger is still there. The wolf instincts. But they're quieter now. Manageable. I'm still me, even when I'm the wolf. Could it work for the others? Mrs. Chen asked. For Catherine? For Timothy, if he'd accept help. We believe so, Sarah said. But we need to test it properly. The ritual I performed with Marcus was experimental, hastily assembled. Margaret and I are refining it. In 2 days, I'll undergo the full version. If it works, if I maintain control during my transformation, then we'll know it's safe to offer to the other werewolves. And if it doesn't work? Thomas Morrison asked the question everyone was thinking. Then Margaret will have to put me down before I hurt anyone, Sarah said simply. Those are the stakes. But I believe it will work. I have to believe that. The room was quiet. Then Sheriff Rodriguez stood. I've been the law in Hollow Creek for 20 years, she said. 20 years of locking people in their homes once a month. 20 years of finding bodies after the full moon passes. 20 years of writing animal attack on death certificates when everyone knows the truth. If there's a chance, any chance of ending that, then I support it. Whatever you need, you have the full backing of my office. One by one, the others agreed. Mrs. Chen offered herbs from her garden, plants that had been carefully cultivated to grow in Hollow Creek's cursed soil. Thomas Morrison brought old journals kept by his family, first-generation survivors with their own theories about the curse's nature. By the time the meeting ended, Sarah had a support system she'd never expected. An entire community ready to fight alongside her. As the others filed out, Marcus lingered. He and Sarah stood on Margaret's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Thank you, he said quietly, for not giving up on me. Thank you for trusting me enough to try. Sarah, about the blood connection. I know. It's unprecedented. Potentially dangerous. Margaret gave me the full lecture. That's not what I was going to say. Marcus turned to face her fully. I was going to say that I can feel you now. Feel your fear, your determination. And I want you to know that when you do the ritual, when you face the curse, you won't be alone. Whatever happens, I'll be there. Not physically, but through the connection. You'll be able to draw on my strength the same way I can feel yours. Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope, real, solid hope that this might actually work. The full moon is in 2 days, she said. I know. Are you afraid? Terrified. But also excited. For the first time in 3 years, I'm excited about the full moon instead of dreading it. That's because of you. They stood together as darkness fell over Hollow Creek, two people bound by curse and ritual, and something else that neither of them had words for yet. Something that felt like the beginning of a story rather than the end. The next day passed in a blur of final preparations. Sarah practiced the ritual words until she could recite them in her sleep. Margaret prepared the ceremonial space in her basement, drawing intricate symbols on the floor in salt and ash. Marcus brought the other werewolves information, current locations, last known human contacts, any details that might help if the ritual succeeded, and they could offer it to others. On the afternoon before the full moon, Sarah went into town one last time. She walked through Hollow Creek's small downtown, looking at it with new eyes. The hardware store that Marcus used to run. The library where Elena Vasquez had spent 40 years researching the curse. The church where, in 1885, terrified parents had locked their transformed children. Every building had a story. Every street corner held memories of lives lived and lives lost to the curse. This was the town Sarah was fighting for, not just her own humanity, but the humanity of everyone who called Hollow Creek home. She was standing in front of the church when she felt it, a pull in her blood, sharp and insistent. The full moon was rising, even though the sun hadn't set yet. Her body knew. The curse knew. It was time. Sarah made her way back to Margaret's house, where Marcus was already waiting. He looked nervous, pacing in the living room like a caged animal. I can feel it too, he said when he saw her. The moon rising. Your curse responding to it. Through the connection, it's like I'm about to transform again myself. Will you be okay? I'll be fine. I can control it now, remember. But his hands were shaking slightly, betraying his words. Margaret emerged from the basement. Everything's ready. Sarah, are you prepared? Was she? Sarah thought about the grocery list she'd been thinking about when this all started. About her normal life in the city that felt like it belonged to someone else now. About Marcus, who'd given up hope until she'd insisted on fighting for him. About all the werewolves in Hollow Creek who might have a chance at reclaiming their humanity if this worked. I'm ready, she said. They descended into the basement. Margaret had transformed it into a proper ritual space, the circle drawn in the center of the floor, candles at every compass point, herbs burning in small bowls that filled the air with sharp, medicinal smoke. The walls were covered in protective symbols, drawn in what looked like silver paint. Marcus, you'll observe from outside the circle, Margaret instructed. Do not cross the salt line no matter what happens. Sarah, you'll stand in the center. The ritual has 3 phases, just like we practiced. Acknowledgement, negotiation, binding. Each phase will be harder than the last. The curse will fight you. It will show you things, offer you things, try to convince you that transformation is the only way. You have to resist. Sarah stepped into the circle. The moment she crossed the salt line, she felt it. The basement somehow became both smaller and infinitely vast. The candles flickered, and shadows moved along the walls in ways that had nothing to do with firelight. Begin with the acknowledgement, Margaret said. Sarah closed her eyes and spoke the words she'd memorized. I am Sarah Chen. I am human and wolf, mortal and cursed. The infection lives in my blood, placed there not by my choice, but by the violence of another. I acknowledge what has been done to me. I claim this darkness, but I do not accept it. I will reshape it. I will remake it into something that serves me rather than controls me. The air in the circle changed. Grew colder. Sarah opened her eyes and saw her breath fogging. Something was listening. Good, Margaret said. She handed Sarah 2 vials, one containing deer blood, one containing a mixture of herbs and Sarah's own blood, drawn earlier. Now the negotiation. Drink both, then speak the words of offering. Sarah drank the first vial. The deer blood was cold, thick, and tasted of iron and earth. Then the second, which burned like fire going down her throat. As she swallowed, she felt Marcus gasp from outside the circle. He could feel it too, the ritual activating, the curse being called to the surface. She spoke. I offer you blood and death, but not human blood. Not human death. I offer you the hunt, but the hunt of my choosing. You will feed, but on my terms. You will rage, but I will hold the leash. This is my bargain. Serve me, and I will serve you. Fight me, and I will bind you so tightly you'll never break free. The cold in the circle intensified. Sarah could see her breath now, great clouds of it. The candles guttered and nearly went out. And then she felt it, the curse, rising to meet her. Rising to meet the challenge she'd issued. It showed her things. Visions, flooding her mind faster than thought. She saw herself as a wolf, powerful and free, running through moonlit woods with Marcus at her side. Saw herself hunting, the thrill of the chase, the satisfaction of the kill. Saw herself standing before the other werewolves of Hollow Creek, Catherine, Timothy, the others, as their alpha, their leader. This is what you could be, the curse whispered. Why cage yourself in human weakness? Why cling to a form that's fragile, that bleeds, that dies? I offer you strength. I offer you eternity. I offer you freedom. No, Sarah said out loud. That's not freedom. That's slavery to hunger. The hunger makes you alive. The hunger makes you real. Accept it. Embrace it. Transform. Sarah felt her body beginning to change. Involuntarily. Her bones started to shift, her teeth elongating. The transformation was beginning, and it was pulling her under like a riptide. Fight it. Margaret's voice distant. Speak the binding. But Sarah couldn't remember the words. The curse was in her mind now, showing her more visions. She saw her mother's face, twisted in terror as Wolf Sarah tore into her throat. Saw her sister's wedding, interrupted by a monster. Saw herself alone in the woods, more animal than woman, forgetting her own name. This is what you are. What you will become. Stop fighting and accept it. No. Sarah's voice was barely human now, distorted by changing vocal cords. I am Sarah Chen. I am not the curse. You are the curse. We are one now. Inseparable. Then, through the haze of transformation, Sarah felt it, the blood connection to Marcus. She reached out with her mind, with her will, and found him there. Found his strength, his hard-won control, his absolute certainty that the curse could be mastered. You're not alone, she felt him say, though he spoke no words. I'm here. We're here. The curse thinks it's fighting one person, but it's fighting both of us. Together. Sarah drew on that connection, drew on Marcus's experience, his 3 years of wrestling with the wolf nature. She felt the transformation slow, felt herself regain a measure of control. And she spoke the words of binding. You will not control me. You will not consume me. I bind you to my will, my consciousness, my soul. When I change, I remain. When you rage, I command. We are not enemies. We are not one. We are partners. Bound by blood and choice. This is my decree, and it will not be broken. The cold shattered like glass. Sarah felt the curse shift. Not break, not disappear, but change its fundamental nature. Like a wild animal that suddenly recognized her as its handler. The transformation that had been tearing through her body stopped, reversed, completed in a way that felt different from anything she'd experienced before. She stood in the center of the circle, fully transformed into wolf form, but still herself. Still Sarah. She could think, could reason, could feel. The hunger was there, yes, but manageable. A background instinct rather than an overwhelming compulsion. She looked down at her transformed body, larger than a natural wolf, covered in dark gray fur. She flexed her claws experimentally, felt the power coiled in her new muscles. Sarah? Margaret's voice cautious. Are you there? Sarah tried to speak, but her new vocal cords couldn't form human words. Instead, she did what Marcus had done in their ritual. She sat, deliberately, and nodded. Margaret's face split into a grin wider than Sarah had ever seen on the serious woman. It worked. By God, it actually worked. Marcus had tears streaming down his face. Through the blood connection, Sarah could feel his joy, his relief, his absolute wonder. You did it, he said. You're still you. Sarah concentrated, drawing on the same instinctive understanding that had guided the transformation. She willed herself to change back, and her body responded. Smoother than Marcus's first reversal, faster. In moments she was human again, naked and shaking, but triumphantly herself. "I'm okay," she said, her voice hoarse. I'm me." It worked, Margaret. The ritual worked. Margaret crossed the salt line and wrapped a blanket around Sarah's shoulders, then pulled her into a fierce hug. "You brave, brilliant, absolutely reckless girl. You did it. You actually broke the curse." "Not broke," Sarah said. "Changed it. The curse is still there. But now it serves me instead of controlling me." "That's even better," Marcus said, stepping into the circle. "Because now we can offer the same thing to the others. Now we can save everyone." Sarah looked between them, Marcus and Margaret, her unlikely allies in this fight. She felt the curse settled in her blood, calm now, waiting for her command. She felt the blood connection to Marcus, binding them in ways that would take time to fully understand. And she felt hope, solid and real. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow we find the others. Tomorrow we offer them a choice, stay trapped in the curse or fight to reclaim themselves. Tomorrow we change Hollow Creek forever." But for tonight, she was simply Sarah Chin. A woman who'd been scratched by a werewolf, who'd refused to accept that as her doom, who'd fought a curse older than anyone alive and won. A woman who was learning that sometimes the most powerful magic was simply refusing to give up on yourself or the people you cared about. The full moon rose over Hollow Creek, painting the world in silver light. And for the first time in 140 years, its light didn't mean inevitable death. It meant possibility. The morning after Sarah's successful transformation, word spread through Hollow Creek like wildfire. Margaret made the calls, using her network of survivors and community leaders. By noon, dozens of people had gathered at her house, not just the core group from the previous meeting, but others who'd heard whispers of something impossible. Something that might change everything. Sarah stood in Margaret's living room, still exhausted from the ritual, but running on adrenaline and determination. Marcus stood beside her, his presence a steadying anchor. Through their blood connection, she could feel his support, his quiet strength. "We need to approach this carefully," Margaret was saying to the assembled group. "The ritual works, we've proven that twice now. But each werewolf situation is different. Some have been infected for decades. Some are barely holding on to their humanity. We need to prioritize who we approach first." Sheriff Rodriguez pulled out a file, her official records on Hollow Creek's known werewolves. "Catherine Lowe should be first. She's been infected for 20-plus years, but she still maintains enough control to avoid the town center during transformations. If we can reach her while she's lucid, she might be willing to try the ritual." "What about Timothy Morrison?" Thomas Morrison asked, his voice heavy with old grief. "He's been lost in the woods since he was 9 years old. He's almost 30 now. Is there any chance we could bring him back?" Margaret's expression was compassionate but realistic. "Timothy is going to be the hardest case. After 20 years fully feral, the human personality might be too buried to reach. But if we can establish the precedent with the others, if we can show that the ritual works even for long-term infections, then yes, we can try for Timothy." "I want to help," Thomas said firmly. "Whatever you need. If there's any chance of getting my son back." "There's a chance," Sarah said. "I won't promise more than that, but there's a chance." They spent the rest of the day planning. Margaret refined the ritual further, creating a standardized version that could be taught to others. Sarah and Marcus worked on identifying the current locations of all 7 werewolves. Sheriff Rodriguez coordinated logistics, how to approach each one safely, how to contain them if the ritual went wrong, how to protect the town if multiple werewolves were undergoing transformation simultaneously. By evening, they had a plan. They would start with Catherine Lowe at dawn, when she'd be weakest after the night's full moon. If that succeeded, they'd move to the others, one by one. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She lay in Margaret's guest room, feeling the curse in her blood calm now, almost dormant, but still there, waiting for the next full moon, when she'd transform again. The thought didn't terrify her anymore. Instead, she felt curious, eager even. She wanted to explore this new form, understand its capabilities and limitations. Around midnight, she heard a soft tap on her window. Marcus, standing in the backyard, gesturing for her to come down. She dressed quickly and slipped out through the back door. The night was cool, the stars brilliant overhead. Marcus looked different in the moonlight, more comfortable in his own skin than she'd ever seen him. Couldn't sleep either? Sarah asked. Too wired. Tomorrow changes everything and I needed to. He trailed off, looking up at the sky. I needed to run. Wanna join me? Run. As wolves. I know the full moon isn't until next month for you, but you can transform at will now, right? The curse answers to you instead of the moon. So let's run. Let's be what we are without the fear or the guilt. Just for a few hours. Sarah hesitated, then smiled. Okay, but if I lose control, you won't. I'll be there. I can feel you through the connection, remember? If anything starts to go wrong, I'll pull you back. They walked to the edge of Margaret's property, to where the woods began. Sarah closed her eyes and reached for the curse, for the transformation. It came easier this time, her body understanding what she was asking. Bones shifted with less pain, for sprouted with less resistance. In moments she was four-legged, wolf-formed, looking at the world through altered senses. Everything was sharper. Smells she'd never noticed before flooded her awareness, pine sap and animal musk, and the rich decay of leaf litter. Her hearing picked up the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the distant sound of water moving over stones. The world was alive in a way she'd never experienced as a human. Marcus transformed beside her, and she recognized him immediately. Not by sight, but by scent, by the way he moved, by the pulse of the blood connection between them. He was larger in wolf form, darker furred, but his eyes were still his own, intelligent and aware. He took off running, and Sarah followed. It was glorious. Her new body was built for this, powerful legs eating up the distance, her senses attuned to every detail of the forest around her. She felt no fear, no hesitation. Just the pure joy of movement, of freedom, of being utterly present in her body. They ran for miles, deeper into the woods than Sarah had ever ventured. Marcus led her to a clearing where a creek burbled over smooth stones, and they stopped to drink. The water tasted different with her wolf tongue, cleaner somehow, more essential. Sarah looked at her reflection in the water. Dark gray fur, yellow gold eyes, powerful jaw. This was her now. Part of her. Not a curse to be feared, but a gift to be understood. Marcus bumped against her shoulder, a wolfish gesture of affection. Through the blood connection, she felt what he was feeling, happiness, relief, and something else. Something that made her heart beat faster even in this form. They ran back to Margaret's property as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Sarah transformed back to human form, feeling energized rather than drained. The curse had fed on the run, on the experience of being fully wolf without guilt or fear. It was satisfied, settled, content. Thank you, she said to Marcus, who'd also changed back. I needed that. Needed to understand that being a werewolf doesn't have to mean being a monster. We're not monsters anymore, Marcus agreed. We're just different. And maybe that's okay. They stood together in the pre-dawn light, two people who'd faced their darkness and come out stronger. Tomorrow they would try to offer that same strength to others. Tonight, they were simply themselves, human and wolf, cursed and free, finding something like hope in the space between. They found Catherine Lowe just after dawn, exactly where Sheriff Rodriguez said she'd be, a small cave in the hills northeast of town, her sanctuary after the monthly transformations. The approach had to be careful. Catherine was dangerous even in human form, unpredictable. She'd been a werewolf for 22 years, and while she maintained more humanity than most long-term infected, she was known to be volatile. Sarah, Marcus, Margaret, and Sheriff Rodriguez made the climb together. They brought the ritual supplies in backpacks, along with silver restraints if things went wrong. The sheriff had her sidearm loaded with silver bullets. Insurance, she'd called it grimly. They found Catherine sitting outside her cave, naked and covered in dried blood. Not human blood, Sarah was relieved to note, animal blood, from whatever she'd hunted during the night. Catherine looked up as they approached, her eyes sharp and wary. Come to kill me? Catherine asked the sheriff, her voice rough from disuse. Come to offer you a choice, Rodriguez replied. Catherine, this is Sarah Chin and Marcus Webb. They found something. A way to control the curse. Catherine's laugh was bitter. There is no controlling the curse. I've tried for 22 years. I know, Marcus said, stepping forward. I tried too. For 3 years I fought it, and I was losing. But Sarah found a way. Not to break the curse, we're still werewolves. But to keep ourselves when we transform. To choose when and how we change. To be human and wolf without losing either one. Catherine studied him, then Sarah. You're serious. We're serious, Sarah said. And we can teach you. If you're willing to try. Why? Why would you help me? Because no one should have to lose themselves to this curse. Because Hollow Creek has suffered long enough. Because... Sarah paused. Because 22 years ago, someone infected you against your will, and you deserve the chance to reclaim what was taken from you. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do I have to do? They performed the ritual there, in the clearing outside Catherine's cave. Margaret drew the circle in ash and salt. Sarah and Marcus guided Catherine through the words, through the acknowledgement and negotiation and binding. It was harder for Catherine. 22 years of infection had rooted the curse deep in her bones. But she fought. And when she transformed, when she stood in wolf form with dawn light breaking over the hills, her eyes were clear. Aware. Human. She changed back with a cry that was half triumph, half sob. I'm still here. After all these years, I'm still here. They wrapped her in blankets and brought her back to town. News of the success spread immediately. By noon, they had 3 more volunteers, werewolves who'd given up hope, who'd resigned themselves to eventually losing their humanity entirely. Now they saw a chance at salvation. Over the next week, Sarah and Margaret performed the ritual 6 more times. Not every attempt succeeded on the first try. One werewolf, a man named David Chin, no relation, though Sarah found the coincidence eerie, required 3 attempts before the binding took hold. But eventually, it worked. All 7 of Hollow Creek's werewolves were brought under control. All except one. Timothy Morrison remained in the woods, feral and unreachable. His father made the journey to Timothy's territory multiple times, calling for his son, but the wolf that Timothy had become didn't respond. Didn't recognize his own name anymore. We have to try, Thomas insisted in one of their planning meetings. He's the only one left. We can't give up on him. It might not be possible, Margaret said gently. Timothy has been fully feral for over 20 years. The human personality might be completely gone. Then we make a new one, Sarah said. Everyone turned to look at her. Listen, the ritual works by reaching the human consciousness inside the wolf, right? By appealing to their sense of self, their memories, their identity. But what if we approached it differently for Timothy? What if instead of trying to wake up the human he was, we teach the wolf he is now to think like a human? That's never been done, Margaret said slowly. I'm not even sure it's possible. Neither was anything else we've accomplished, Marcus pointed out. And we have an advantage now. 7 werewolves who can transform at will, who maintain their human minds in wolf form. What if we approach Timothy as a pack? Show him that wolves don't have to be solitary, Savage. That there's another way to be. It was risky. Unprecedented. Possibly futile. But they decided to try. They went into the deep woods on a crisp October afternoon, 3 weeks after Sarah's first transformation. 7 werewolves in human form, plus Margaret to perform the ritual if they could reach Timothy, plus Thomas Morrison to provide a human anchor. Sarah led the way, following the guidance of her wolf senses to track Timothy's territory. Marcus walked beside her, their blood connection making them naturally coordinated. Behind them came Catherine, David, and the others, a pack of humans who were also wolves, united in purpose. They found Timothy in a clearing deep in the old-growth forest, a place that hadn't seen human footsteps in decades. He was in wolf form despite the sun being high. Sarah realized with a shock that he might not remember how to change back. Might not even know that he could. He was massive, larger than any of them. 20 years of living fully as a wolf had honed him into something almost prehistoric. His fur was matted, his eyes wild. He snarled as they approached, hackles rising. Timothy, Thomas called out, his voice breaking. Timothy, it's Dad. I know you're in there. I know you remember me. The wolf, Timothy, didn't react. just continued to snarl, ready to attack or flee. Sarah made a decision. She transformed, letting the curse sweep through her in a smooth wave. Around her, the others did the same. 7 werewolves standing before one feral wolf, showing him that transformation didn't have to mean losing yourself. Timothy stopped snarling. He looked at them with something like confusion. Wolves, yes. But wolves who stood like humans, who moved with human intelligence, who looked at him with human eyes. Sarah stepped forward slowly, keeping her posture non-threatening. Through the blood connection, she felt Marcus's support, his strength. She tried to project calm, safety, pack. You're not alone. She tried to communicate, not with words, but with body language, with scent, with the wolf nature that she was still learning. You were never supposed to be alone. Timothy took a step back, then forward. Uncertain. Drawn to this pack that smelled like him but moved like something other. Marcus joined Sarah, then Catherine. One by one, the other werewolves formed a circle around Timothy, not trapping him, but including him. Showing him what pack meant. What it could mean. Margaret began to chant the ritual words, though Sarah wasn't sure if they would work without Timothy's human cooperation. The words echoed through the clearing, old and powerful. Thomas Morrison stood at the edge of the circle, tears streaming down his face, calling his son's name over and over. And something shifted. Timothy sat down. Just sat, like he'd done as a trained dog years and years ago. It was the most human gesture Sarah had seen from him, a memory encoded so deeply that even 20 years of feral existence couldn't completely erase it. That's it, Thomas said, his voice choked. Good boy, Timothy. Come home. Please come home. The transformation, when it came, was agonizing to watch. Timothy fought it, not understanding what was happening, terrified of the change after so long in one form. But the pack held steady, their presence a calm anchor. Sarah poured everything she had through her connection to Marcus, and Marcus shared it with the others, strength, certainty, the absolute conviction that Timothy could be saved. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, a naked man lay in the center of the circle where the wolf had been. Emaciated, filthy, wild-eyed. But human. Undeniably human. Timothy? Thomas approached slowly, carefully. The man Timothy looked at him. No recognition in his eyes yet, but no hostility either. Just confusion. Exhaustion. Dad, Timothy said. The word was mangled, his vocal cords unused to forming human speech. But it was a word. Human language. Understanding. Thomas Morrison dropped to his knees and pulled his son into his arms, and both men wept like the 20 years between them had never existed. The recovery process took time. Timothy had to relearn how to be human, how to walk on 2 legs, how to use his hands, how to speak in sentences instead of growls. But he had help. 7 werewolves who understood what he was going through, who could guide him in mastering the curse instead of being mastered by it. And a father who never gave up hope. By November, all 8 werewolves were integrated back into Hollow Creek society. Marcus reopened his hardware store. Catherine got a job at the library, continuing Elena Vasquez's research. Timothy, still mostly nonverbal, began working with his father in the family carpentry business, his wolf strength useful for heavy lifting. The full moon came and went without incident. All 8 werewolves transformed as planned, but they did it safely, in a designated area outside of town. They hunted deer together, ran through the woods together, celebrated their wolf nature without guilt or fear. And in the morning, they transformed back and went about their human lives. The emergency shelter-in-place alert stopped. The triple-locked doors were opened. Hollow Creek began to heal. Sarah and Marcus found themselves spending more and more time together, not just because of the blood connection, though that certainly played a role. They understood each other in ways no one else could. Understood the dual nature of their existence, the strange gift the curse had become. One evening in December, they stood on the edge of town, looking out at the forest that had once meant only danger. I never thought I'd say this, Marcus said, but I'm glad I was infected. Not glad for the pain or the people I hurt before we found the solution, but glad for what it taught me, for what it let me become. I understand, Sarah said. She'd been thinking the same thing. The curse took something from us, but it also gave us something. A different way of seeing the world. A different way of being in it. And each other. It gave us each other. Sarah looked at him, this man who'd attacked her car on a dark road, who'd infected her with a curse she'd had to fight to control. This man who'd become her anchor, her partner, her pack. Yeah, she said softly. It gave us that too. They stood together as snow began to fall, the first of the season. Hollow Creek spread out below them, lights beginning to come on in windows. A town that had lived with a curse for 140 years, now learning to live with something new, werewolves who were neither human nor monster, but something in between. Something that might just be better than either option alone. The hunt was over. The curse was controlled. And a new story was beginning, one of coexistence, of transformation that didn't mean loss, of humans and wolves learning to be one without sacrificing either. Sarah Chen had come to Hollow Creek thinking about grocery lists. She was staying because she'd found something more important than her old life, purpose, community, and the understanding that sometimes the things that seem like curses are actually the greatest gifts we receive. The moon rose over the forest, and for the first time in generations, its light meant only beauty. Only possibility. Only home. The end. I want to say thank you for listening to this beautiful story. I'm Grace Mira, and every story you hear here is written by me, with the voices and images brought to life using AI. If you enjoyed this one, please subscribe, like, and share. Your support helps me create more lovely stories for you.